In this GS Paper 1 History Marathon, Part 1, Art and Architecture, we discussed two chapters in the 5 chapters. The first one we discussed rock shelters and grid cities. Then we discussed the Buddhist centuries till now, and the one lag left behind that is what you have to say and what don't say. Ashoka built stupas we photograph. Do not say like that. Rock cut architecture is the reason we know Ajivikas existed. Do not say Ashoka built the stupas we photograph. Further, instead of that, what you have to say? Ashoka built the brick core, the strong casing, railing, and gateways came roughly 2 centuries later and donor funded. Then comes to rock cut architecture. Rock cut architecture is the reason Rock cut architecture is the reason we know the Ajivikas existed. Do not say like that. What you have to say instead of that, some of the most important surviving material and inscriptional evidence, they are also known from Buddhist and Jain texts. And Ajanta is the only surviving ancient Indian painting. You do not say like this. What you have to say instead of that, by far the most substantial Bag and Sittanavasal survived too, not only Ajanta. And Udayagiri and Kandagiri belongs to 6th to 10th century phase. You don't have to say like this. You have to say like this. 1st century BC under Karavela, the early historic origin happened also. Then the wheel on the flag comes from a stupa railing. You don't have to say like that. Instead of that, from the abacus of Sarnath lion capital, the drum, the 4 lion stands on. This is our national emblem. So one pillar at Sarnath carries both. The lions on the emblem stood on its capital. The wheel on the flag was carved on the abacus they stood on. We did not choose national symbols and the find and then find movements and the find then we did not choose national symbols and then find monuments to match them. We took them off a single piece of Mauryan stone. What are the most probable questions for 2026 from this chapter? The distribution of rock cut monasteries in the Western Deccan reflects the commerce of the period as much as its religion. Examine. This is 10 marker 150 words. Then discuss the significance of Buddhist heritage sites in India's cultural diplomacy. This question for 15 markers 250 words. And then early Indian art absorbed popular cult rather than displacing it. Elucidate with reference to Buddhist monuments. This is 150 words 10 marker question. These are three most probable questions for 2026 as far as this particular chapter is concerned. Then we are moving to next chapter, that is part 3, three schools and a fourth medium. What are those three schools and what is the fourth medium? Three schools are Gandhara, Mathura, and Amaravati art of architecture. And what is the fourth medium we are going to discuss? So, the Buddha had no face. This is the scene number 1 we are going to discuss. Begin with something that surprises most students the first time they hear it. For roughly the first 500 years of Buddhist art, nobody carved the Buddha. Nobody carved the Buddha. And this is the Gandhara art. Then this is the Mathura. And this is the Amaravati. Amaravati art. So, what are the first scene? The problem of the chapter's answer, that is, for roughly the first 500 years of Buddhist art, nobody carved the Buddha. This is the first scene, that is, the Buddha had no face. Begin with something that surprised most students the first time they hear it. For roughly the first 500 years of Buddhist art, nobody carved the Buddha. Go to Barhut, go to Sanchi, go to the early phase of Amaravati. The Buddha is present in every scene and absent from every scene. So he's he's shown as the Bodhi tree and at the enlightenment, as an empty throne, the Vajrasana, as a pair of footprints, the Buddha Pada, as the wheel, the Dharma Chakra at the first sermon, as the stupa at the Parinirvana, at the great departure, a riderless horse walks out of the palace with an umbrella held over an empty saddle. So the composition is complete. The central figure is deliberately not there. That is an aniconism, and it is not a technical limitation. These are sculptors who could carve anything. It is a theological position about what can and cannot be represented. And then, around the first century of the Common Era, it stops. The Buddha acquires a body, a face, robes, and hands. And within a few generations, the image is everywhere. Two things changed at once. Mahayana was rising with its bodhisattvas and its devotional practice, and the devotion wants something to face. And the Kushans were ruling, a Central Asian dynasty controlling the routes between India, Iran, Central Asia, and the Roman world, patronizing Buddhism and paying for stone. So here is the scholarly problem, and you should state that it is unresolved, because that is what a good candidate does. The image appears in two places at roughly the same time. In Gandhara in the northwest and Mathura in the Ganga Yamuna Doab. Which came first has been argued for over a century, and the argument has never been settled. Foucher argued Gandhara and a Hellenistic origin. Kumaraswamy argued for Mathura and an indigenous one. So do not pick a side in an answer. Say the priority is disputed, and then say the more interesting thing, it does not matter very much, because what the two schools produced was so different that neither can be a copy of the other. That difference is the chapter. So this is from first to 500 Buddha has no face. After that, first century era, first century CE, then started with Buddha face, ribs, etc., etc. Then we are moving to the scene number 2, that is Gandhara and where it came from. The Greeks were gone before Gandhara began. So both PYQs live here. Take them together because they are the same question asked for two directions. The first one is what Gandhara art actually looks like. So the attribution has something to attach it. Grey blue schist, latter stucco, the Buddha with wavy hair, the Ushnisha rendered as a top knot of gathered hair rather than a cranial swelling, sharp features, deep set eyes, an aquiline nose, anatomy modeled naturalistically, weight on the leg, one leg, and above all the drapery, thick, heavy, falling in deep sculpted folds, the real weight in them, like a woolen toga rather than Indian cloth. Expression somber and inward meditative. The halo plane around the figures, an architectural and decorative vocabulary that is unmistakably Mediterranean. So Corinthian capitals, acanthus leaves, atlas figures straining under cornices, garland bearing putti, wine scrolls, tritons, and centaurs. So now the 2019 question, Central Asian and Greco-Bactrian elements. Now the 2019 question, Central Asian and Greco-Bacterian elements. Take Greco-Bacterian first. So, and be precise about what that phrase means. It does not mean Greece. It means the Hellenistic successor kingdoms of Bactria. The political residue left across the northwest after Alexander, sustained through the Seleucids and then independently, and known to as largely through their coinage. Their contribution to Gandhara is a vocabulary already domesticated in the region. The naturalistic human figure, contrapposto, drapery as a modeled surface, the classical architectural orders, and portraiture on coins. Now the Central Asian layer. We discussed belong the chronology. The Greco-Bactrian kingdoms fell around the 2nd century BC, and then comes to Central Asian layer, which candidates almost always miss. This is the Kushans were Uchis. The Kushans were Uchis, a Central Asian people, not an Indian dynasty. What they brought is visible on the stone. Royal and donor figures were royal and donor figures wear steppy dress, belted tunics, trousers, heavy coats, boots, clothing utterly foreign to the Indian sculptural tradition, which had never needed to carve a trouser. Bodhisattva figures appear as princes in turbans, heavy jewelry, and mustaches, reflecting a Central Asian aristocratic idea of what a nobleman looks like. Iranian elements enter through the same door. Fire altars, Zoroastrian and Iranian deities and Kushan coinage alongside the Buddha. And the Silk Route is the mechanism running both ways. Gandhara sat on the trunk route. It received, it also exported, carrying the Buddha image north into Central Asia. That is Bamiyan Valley, Khotan, and from there into China. Gandhara is a principal reason East Asian Buddhist art looks the way it does. A principal reason is a principal reason, not the reason. The image traveled through Central Asia and arrived into Chinese traditions that were already formed and shaped them rather than creating them from nothing. So comes to the 2014 question, and this is where the chapter's argument lies. What is that? Gandhara sculpture owed as much to the Romans as to the Greeks. So this is a restrictive assertion. You are being asked to substantiate a claim that sounds counterintuitive. So you have to run the drill, concede, then extend, then qualify the frame itself. The Greco-Bactrian kingdom was overrun by Central Asian peoples around the 2nd century BCE, and the last Indo-Greek rulers disappear from the record by about the turn of the era. Gandhara sculpture flourishes from roughly the 1st to the 4th century of the Common Era, peaking in the 2nd and the 3rd century Common Era. So the school we call Greek reached its height somewhere between 2 and 400 years after the last Greek king. Nobody in Gandhara workshop had ever met a Greek. So, but something else was happening in exactly those centuries. Indo-Roman trade was at its peak. Roman coins, glass, branches, and lamps turn up at Taxila. The Begram hoard holds Roman glass and plaster medallions in the same deposit as Indian ivories and Chinese lacquer. Chinese lacquer. The Pericles describes the roots. The Greeks were gone before Gandhara began. The Romans were trading while it was being carved. So that single contrast is the answer to the 2014 question, and it is worth memorizing in that form. Now list the specially Roman depths because the examiners had explained the drapery. The drapery. Deep, heavy, weighty folds are closer to the Roman toga than to the lighter Greek himation. Then varistic portraiture. veristic portraiture, the individualized, aging, characterful head is Roman taste. Not a classical Greek one, that was, which idealized stucco. The shift from schist to modeled stucco is in the latter phase uses a Roman period Mediterranean technique. The decorative, the decorative repertoire, garland bearing, erodes wine scroll, the Corinthian, the Corinthian order as the Romans deployed it rather than as the Greeks invented it. And the transmission mechanism, not conquest but commerce, which is why the influence looks like a trader's cargo rather than a conqueror program. The qualify the assertion's own frame, and this is what lifts the answer. Both attributions, Greek and Roman, describe the form. Greco-Roman neither describes the content. Every subject on a Gandhara panel is Indian. The Jataka stories, the life of the Buddha, the great departure, the first sermon, the parinirvana, etc. The mudras are Indian, the Ushnisha and Urna are Indian, the stupa, the panels, decorative is Indian. So the honest formulation is what Gandhara is an Indian subject rendered in a Mediterranean formal language under Central Asian patronage. Whether the Mediterranean input was more Greek or Roman or more Roman is a question about the surface. The building underneath is Buddhist and Indian throughout. So this is regarding that particular Greco-Roman and Greco-Bactrian and Central Asian lineage patronage. So scene number 3, that is Gandhara, Mathura and Amaravati. So Mathura and the other answer here. Now the same problem solved the opposite way, roughly 400 miles away and not roughly at the same time. Comes to Mathura, the material tells you immediately mottled red sand, red sandstone from the Sikri quarries, speckled with cream flakes wherever that stone turns up at Sarnath, at Sravasti, at Kausambi. It is a Mathura export, which is how we know Mathura was a production center, supplying half of northern India. And the figure is the opposite of Gandharas in almost every particular. The face is round and full, not sharp. The head is shaven in the earliest images, latter covered in tight snail shell curls. The eyes are open, not lowered. The expression is alert and often smiling rather than withdrawn. The body is fleshy, robust, energetic, broad at the shoulder with an inflated quality to the torso, and the drapery is the diagnostic difference where Gandhara piles up heavy folds but comes to Mathura. Mathura renders cloth as thin, clinging, almost transparent with folds indicated by shallow incised lines, incised or incised lines. It covers the left shoulder and leaves the right bare. It does not disguise the body, it reveals it. The halo is elaborately carved with a scalloped edge, where Gandharas is plain. The Buddha sits in Padmasana on a lion throne with the right hand raised in Abhaya Mudra. Where does that come from? Not from anywhere abroad. Mathura's Buddha grows out of an existing indigenous tradition. The massive frontal fleshy yaksha figures of the preceding centuries take a yaksha, give him a monastic robe and a halo, and the Mathura Buddha is recognizably his descendant. The physical vocabulary was already here. The physical vocabulary was already there, and Mathura did something Gandhara did not. It was not a Buddhist workshop, it was a workshop. The same yards product produced Jain Tirthankaras, Hindu deities, Vishnu, Shiva, Surya, Kubera, the Naga figures, and Kushan royal portraits, including the famous handless standing statue of Kanishka in coat and boots, inscribed with his titles. That matters for an answer. Mathura is where the visual conventions of Indian religious art in general were standardized, not just Buddhist art. Gandhara made the Buddha look Mediterranean. Look Mediterranean. Mathura is where the conventions of Indian religious imagery in general were standardized. So, what is the one line in forward? The Gupta period, the two streams converge and refine Mathura string fold drapery and Sarnath's plain transparent robe produce the classical Buddha image. So, we discussed so far Gandhara and Mathura. So, comes to Gandhara and Mathura. In that, in Gandhara, the material used grey blue schist later stucco. Comes to Mathura, mottled red sikri sandstone. Then comes to face sharp aquiline, a deep set, round full open eyes comes to Mathura. Then drapery in Gandhara, heavy modeled folds, both shoulders comes to Mathura. Drapery, thin clinging inside sit line, right shoulder bare. Then comes to Gandhara, halo, plain, halo Mathura, scalloped elaboratory cravel, and comes to mood Gandhara, sombre, inward, but comes to Mathura, it changed into alert and outward. Then exported Gandhara, north by land, Central Asia and China, Mathura art across northern India. So this is the actual Gandhara and Mathura related between the material differences and similarities face drapery, halo, mood and exported. Then comes to the Amaravati. Amaravati material carved with white limestone, then face slender elongated, comes to drapery light in motion, halo, then comes to mood narrative crowded and exported east by sea, Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. So drapery is the diagnostic, not stone color. Mathura's ancestry is essentially indigenous, like the Yakshas given a robe and a halo, and it is where conventions of Indian religious imagery in general were standardized. As far as Gandhara, Mathura, and Amaravati, three is concerned, we are discussing regarding material which were used in that place, then face, then drapery, then halo, then mood, then exported. This is one of the most important topic as far as ancient art and architecture history is concerned. Then comes to the fourth scene, that is Amaravati and the third school. The third school is in the Krishna Valley in the Andhra country under the Shatavahanas and then the Ikshwakus, and it deserves more attention than it usually gets. The material is white or greenish limestone, sometimes called Palnad marble, and it takes a finer edge than either schist or sandstone. The great monument was the Mahachaitya at Amaravati, a stupa sheathed in carved drum slabs and casing slabs with a feature found nowhere in the north. Ayaka pillar sets of five standing on projecting platforms at the four cardinal points. That is an Andhra invention. The style is distinctive and you should be able to name it in three words, that is narrative, crowded, kinetic. The figures are slendered and elongated, turning in tribanga, packed into compositions on intersecting planes to that surface reads a swarm rather than a row. So where Gandhara is solemn and Mathura is solid, Amaravati is in motion. So it has been well described as linear and rhythmic. And Amaravati has one property the other schools do not. Amaravati has one property the other two schools do not. What is that property? Its production spans the transition itself. The earlier phase is aniconic and the latter phase is carries the Buddha image. On the same monument, Amaravati is the clearest place where the change This chapter opened with can be watched happening on a single stupa. So then the argument that makes this scene worth its minutes. The Amaravati school did not stay in India. Its style traveled by sea. The Buddha figure of the Amaravati type is found in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Java, and Vietnam. Related sites at Nagarjunakonda, Jaggayapeta, and Ghantasala extend the tradition along the same coast. Said that beside Gandhara, Gandhara exported the Buddha image north by land along the Silk Route into Central Asia and China. Amaravati exported it east by sea into Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. Two schools, two directions, and between them, they seeded the Buddhist art of a half continent. So that is a far better closing line and answer than a list of stylistic features one presented a note. So the Amaravati sculptures are today divided between the British Museum and the Government Museum in Chennai. The dispersal of a single monument across two countries is a live heritage question, and that is chapter 10 develops it. So this is regarding Gandhara, Mathura, and Amaravati art of Buddhist architecture. Then we are moving to the fourth medium, that is branch. Last wax casting in 5 stages. Everything so far has been stone. Now the parallel tradition which runs for 4,500 years, that is 4,500 years, has never been asked about, which is exactly why you should know it. The technique first, because it is the same technique throughout. Last wax casting, Sire Purdue, and in the Indian text, Madhuchista Vidhan, 5 stages. What are the 5 stages? And name them in order. The first one is a wax model. A wax model is sculpted in full detail. Every feature that will appear in the metal is made first in wax. So then comes to the mold. The mold is heated, the wax runs out, leaving a cavity that is an exact negative of the model. Then comes to third one. This is third one, mold. Second one, I will repeat it again. The first one is model. A wax model is sculpted in full detail. Every feature that will appear in the metal is made first in wax. Then comes to the model is coated in layers of fine clay to form a mold. That is mold second one. Then third one, the mold is heated. The wax runs out of leaving a cavity that is an exact negative of the model. This is called melt. And fourth one, molten metal is poured into the cavity. In South India, commonly panchaloha, a 5 metal alloy. That is pour. And the fifth one is the mold is broken, which is why each casting is unique. There is no reusable mold, and the metal is filled, polished, detailed, and for a deity image ritually consecrated by the opening of the eyes. So this is called last wax technique, last wax casting. This discussed in 5 stages. First one is model, then mold, then molt, then pour, then break. So now the sequence, and it is remarkable for its length, comes to Harappan around 2500 BCE. The dancing girl from Mohenjo-daro, about 10.5 centimeter of bronze, named in chapter 1, and already a competent last wax casting. The technique is present at the very beginning of Indian urban civilization around 1500 BCE. The Daimamad branches in Maharashtra, a chariot, a bull, an elephant, a rhinoceros, larger, heavier castings suggesting ritual or ceremonial use. The early historic and classical phase, bronze becomes the medium of the portable icon, Buddhist, Jain, and Hindu alike. and portability is the whole point, because an image that can move can travel with patronage and with the pilgrims. The regional flowering is Gupta and Vakataka refinement. The Sultanganj Buddha is the great surviving example. Pala Sena Buddhist branches from eastern India exported into Tibet and Southeast Asia. Distinct traditions in western India and in the Himalayas, and the Kashmir workshops. Then comes to the culmination. Then the culmination, Chola, 9th to 13th century, and here branch stops being one medium among several and becomes the supreme temple medium in the Tamil country. Understand why? Because this is the part that scores, stone stays in the sanctum. The stone image is fixed and in the strictest practice seen by few. But Chola temple religion was processional. The deity goes out through the streets at festivals to be seen by everyone. A processional deity must be portable, and portable at that scale means metal. So Chola branch is not a decorative achievement. It is theological requirement solved in an ally. That comes to the Nataraja in the Nataraja is the culmination of the culmination. And the reason is the most concentrated piece of design in Indian art is that five cosmic acts, the Pancha Kritya, are each assigned to a specific element of one figure. So you have to name them in this order, and the whole thing becomes reproducible. So around the Prabha Mandala, the ring flames. Prabha Prabha Mandala, the ring flames, the Ganga in the flying matted locks, the crescent moon, five acts in one figure held in a pose of perfect balance while everything in its motion. That is worth one sentence in any answer on Indian sculpture on branch or an achieves of Chola achievement. And if you can attach each act to its element, you are writing something almost nobody else in the hall you can write. So I am repeating again. Comes to the Nataraja as far as branch is concerned. Five cosmic acts, five elements in one figure. So what is the act here? Srishti, creation, where it sits, the Damaru, the drum in the upper right hand. The drum in the upper right hand. This is the first sound. And then comes to sthiti, preservation. The lower right hand in abhaya mudra. Do not fear. And then comes to samhara, destruction, agni, in the flame of the upper left hand. Then comes to tirobhava, concealment, apasama, apasmara, the dwarf under roof pressed down by right foot. This is. And then anugraha, grace, the gajahasta, hand pointing across the raised left foot, and they refuse. So around the Prabha Mandala, the Ganga in the flying locks, the crescent moon, four attributes cannot carry five facts. A student who half remembers writes nonsense. So five cosmic acts, five cosmic acts, five elements of one figure. Srushti, Sthiti, Samhara, Tirobhava, Anugraha. These are five cosmic acts, five elements of one figure, that is Nataraja. This is bronze sculpture. This is the culmination of Cholas. Then we are moving to the what the schools were for and where they are now. So we have to pull the chapter together with the paradox it opened on here. in the same century under the same dynasty, serving the same religion. One workshop in the northwest carved a Buddha who looks like a Roman senator, and another in the Doyab carved a Buddha who looks like a Yaksha. Neither is a corruption of the other, both are correct. That tells you something about how Indian art works that generalizes far beyond Buddhism. Indian religious art has never had a single orthodox form. It has iconographic rules, mudras, attributes, proportions, the Shilpa text, and has almost unlimited regional freedom in how those rules are rendered. The content is prescribed, the style is not. That is why a Gandhara Buddha and a Mathura Buddha are both unambiguously the Buddha and look nothing alike. And now the present tense, because this chapter has an unusually live one. Why? The tradition is not extinct. At Swamimalai, near Kumbakonam, hereditary Stapati families still cast branches by last wax under the same Shilpa text for temples that will still carry them through the streets. This is not a revived craft, it is a craft that never stopped. And the objects are moving. The Amaravati sculptures are split between the London and Chennai. Gandhara pieces are scattered across the museums of three continents. And in a case worth naming, in March 2026, the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford returned a 16th century branch of the Saint Tirumankai Alvar to India. After research established that it had been photographed in 1957 at the Sri Soundararaja Perumal temple in Tadikombu in Tamil Nadu and later replaced there with a replica. So you have to read that last detail carefully because it is the whole heritage problem in one sentence. The theft was not noticed for decades because a copy was left in place. The image kept being worshipped, nobody looked up. That is why documentation matters, why provenance records, photographic archives, and digital inventories are not bureaucratic housekeeping, but the only defense a living tradition has. An object still in use is an object nobody audits. So Gandhara sent the Buddha north by land. North by land. Amaravati sent him east by sea. And in a temple in Tamil Nadu, a branch went missing for 50 years because someone left a copy where it had been standing. So what you have to say it this way and not that way? So do not say like this. Gandhara art was made by Greek sculptors. You have to say instead of that, the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms had fallen 2 to 4 centuries before Gandhara's flourish. The vocabulary was inherited and locally domesticated. Then Mathura copied Gandhara or Gandhara copied Mathura. You do not have to say like this. You do not say. Instead of that, priority is disputed and unresolved since Hocher and Kumaraswamy, the two idioms are too different for either to derive from the other. Amaravati is the only place the transition can be seen. Do not say the clearest place. Sanchi carries later added images. You have to say instead of that. Naming four hands and then claiming five acts. Do not say. Assign all five Damaru, Abhaya, Agni, Apasmara underfoot and the Gajasta pointing the raised foot. This is regarding Nataraja. And then comes to Gandhara. Gandhara is the reason for East Asian Buddhist art exists. Do not say like that. A principal reason. The image passed through Central Asia to traditional traditions already forming. So this is regarding in your answer, write like this rather than write like that. So this is the way you have to write using the using in your answers as sentences. The most probable questions from this chapter is 2026 for Compare and contrast the Gandhara and Mathura schools of sculpture and account for their divergence. This is 150 words 10 marker question. Then next question, trace the evolution of bronze sculpture in India and account for its culmination under the Cholas. 250 words 15 marker. Indian religious art prescribed content but left style free. Examine with reference to the early schools of sculpture. 150 words 10 marker question. Then we are moving to the Gupta synthesis. That is the fourth chapter. This is the chapter number 4, the Gupta synthesis. What is in this we are going to discuss? The age we call classic is the age when the temple was still a prototype. Its finest surviving art is on coins, not walls. So, what are the past questions anchored here? How do you justify the view that the excellence of Gupta numismatics art is not at all noticeable? And then comes to next one, discuss the main contributions of Gupta period and Chola period to Indian heritage and culture. Then we are moving to scene number 1, that is what is that, what the classical does not mean. Every textbook calls the Gupta period classical. Before you accept the word, look at what the Guptas actually built, not one monumental temple. Go to the surviving Gupta shrines, Sanchi temple number 17, Tigawa, Nashna, Bumara, Baitargaon, Diogar. They are small. Many are flat roofed boxes with a pillared porch. Even the most developed of them would sit comfortably inside a Chola mandapa with room to spare. So now set that against what came later and notice how the latter work clusters. Around the year 1010, around the year 1010, that is 1010, some 5 centuries after the Guptas, Rajaraja the first raised a granite tower of roughly 216 feet at Tanjavur. Around 1030, that is 1030, 20 years later, not 500, Vidyadhara's Chandellas were clustering subsidiary towers around a single shikara at Khajuraho. The two supreme achievements of the southern and the northern idiom happen within one generation of each other. Half a continent, subcontinent apart, 500 years after the age we call classical. Half a subcontinent apart, 500 years after the age we call classical. Whatever the Guptas gave those builders, it took 5 centuries to mature, and then it matured in both idioms at once. So, in what sense the Guptas age classical? Classical, not in scale, not in scale. In codification, classical in codification, not in scale. What the Guptas fixed was not buildings but conventions. How a deity should be proportioned, how a robe should fall, what a temple's essential parts are, what Sanskrit poetry should sound like, how a number should be written. They produced the templates that everyone afterwards worked from. And here is the consequence for this chapter and the reason for the paradox. A period that codifies will not necessarily leave the biggest monuments. A period that codifies will not necessarily leave the biggest monuments. It leaves the most reproduced ones. The Gupta legacy is portable. A Buddha type that traveled to China and Japan, a decimal notion, a decimal notation that traveled to Baghdad and Europe, a Sanskrit canon that was copied for 1,000 years, a temple plan that everyone later enlarged, and what the Gupta age is itself made best in the medium where it is most fully preserved. It's not architecture at all, it is the coin. That is where the chapter begins. So then we are moving to the coins as a work of art. Why the coin is art, not currency? Think once. Here is the 2017 question, 150 words, 10 marks. What is that question? How do you justify the view that the level of the excellence of the Gupta numismatic art is not at all noticeable in latter times? What is the question? I am repeating again. How do you justify the view that the level of the excellence of the Gupta numismatic art is not at all noticeable in latter times? You cannot justify a claim about decline without first establishing the peak. You cannot justify a claim about decline without first establishing the peak. So spend your opening third on what Gupta coinage actually achieved. So when you have to write an answer on decline, so before that what you have to do is you have to write a peak stage. So 1 by third you have to open with the peak of Gupta age. So spend your opening third on the what Gupta coinage actually achieved, and be specific because generic praise scores nothing. So start with the lineage because it matters. So Gupta gold begins from the Kushan gold standard. Weight, module, and the initial types are inherited and is then progressively Indianized in legend, deity, and iconography. The coin is called dinara. Now, the four things that make it art rather than currency. What are the four things? The first one is the king is shown doing something, not a static profile bust, which is what most ancient coinages gives you. Gupta observes to show the ruler in action, the ruler in action, drawing a bow, slaying a lion, slaying a tiger, riding, performing the Ashwamedha, reclining on a couch, standing beneath the parasol. And one type is extraordinary. What is that? Samudragupta had himself struck seated playing the veena. A conquering emperor, the man whose Allahabad pillar inscription lists campaigns across the subcontinent, chose to appear on his own currency as a musician. No later Indian ruler appears on his own coinage that way. You have to hold that image. It is the single best example you can give of what Gupta coinage was telling, willing to attempt. So in this first we discuss action, and the second one is the figure are modeled, not drawn. High relief, real anatomy, weight and balance in the pose, individualized faces. These are miniature sculptures, and the same sensibility that shaped Gupta stone is at work on a disc a few centimeters across. The third one is the legends are literatures. The legends are literature, Sanskrit in Brahmi, in poetic epithets, and often in meter, parakram, apratihata, apratirata, vyagra parakrama. The text is not a mint mark. It is composed and composed to be read as praise poetry. Then fourth is image and text are designed together, integration. So the tiger slayer type carries the tiger epithet. The lyrist type carries a musical legend. The Ashwamedha type carries the sacrificial claim. The coin is a single integrated composition, which is a genuinely rare achievement in numismatics anywhere at that point of time. So we have to add the reverses. Lakshmi enthroned are on a lion, Ganga on her Makara, Kartikeya on his peak, a full iconographic program rather than a filler design. And add the purity because it becomes the argument in scene number 3. The earlier Gupta issues are of high gold content that will not last and beings the decline begins inside the dynasty itself. The next scene is, and then for 1,000 years nothing like that. This is the second half of the 2017 question. Now justify the claim and then contest it. Both halves are required. So figure royal portraiture and Indian coinage peaks in the 4th to 5th centuries. It does not appear again at the level until Jahangir in the early 17th century, roughly 1,000 years in which no Indian ruler is rendered on currency as the Guptas rendered themselves. That gap is the answer to the 2017 question. And everything else is the explanation of it. Four reasons, and give them in order. The first one is debasement begins inside the dynasty. Later Gupta gold shows falling gold content even as the coins grow heavier, more metal, less gold. Economic strain is visible on the currency before it is visible anywhere else. And second one, the gold supply and the reason for gold both go. Long distance trade contracts, the Roman commerce that had fed bullion into India through the early centuries thins out. The Huna invention disrupted the north. Post Gupta northern Indian largely stops issuing gold coinages at all. And a tradition that is not practiced cannot be refined. And the third reason is stylistic collapse where coinage does continue. Later on, post-Gupta types become schematic. The modeled body flattens into linear convention, faces loss individuality, and the composition degenerates into repeated marks. In Western India, the process runs to its extreme in the Indo-Sasanian series, whose late issues are known as the Gadia Paisa, where a royal head becomes a cluster of geometric strokes no longer legible as face. Then fourth one, poetic legend disappears. The composed Sanskrit epithet, the thing that made it the coin a literary object, does not survive the loss of the courts that commissioned it. So the justification is complete. Now contest not at all because the phrases is too absolute and the examiner has left you the opening. So this is the justify claim with the four reasons, that is debasement inside the dynasty, trade contract and bullion goes, then post Guptan North Indian largely stops issues gold, then style schematics, point of ineligibility of Indo-Sasanian series, the composite legendary disappears with the court's poetry. Later coinage achieved excellence in different registers. Under the Delhi Sultanate, coinage becomes a calligraphic art. Islamic practice removes the figure from the coin entirely, and the aesthetic energy moves into the Arabic script, proportion, spacing, the disposition of text within a circle. Iltutmish, Iltutmish silver Tanka and the latter Sultanate issues are accomplished by the standard, which is simply a different standard. Under the Mughals, the figure returns spectacularly. Jahangir struck a zodiac series, the 12 signs, one to a king, one to a coin, and a portrait coins bearing his own likeness, which is precisely the thing that had been absent for a millennium. Some of his presentation issues are among the finest coins struck anywhere in the world. So you have to give the calibrated verdict, and this is the sentence that scores. Gupta numismatic art remains unmatched as figural, royal portraiture integrated with composed Sanskrit legend, and that specific combination genuinely never recurs, but not at all noticeable in later times. Overstates it. The Sultanate achieved calligraphic excellence the Guptas never attempted, and Jahangir achieved a figural excellence that stands comparison with them. The tradition was not continued, it was replaced. That distinction discontinued rather than degraded. It is the whole answer. So, in the first half of what we are doing is, what we have done is justify the claim with four reasons. Then we using the contest not at all with the Delhi Sultanate coins. Then we can give the balanced verdict. So then we are moving to the next part, next scene, that is the first temples and why they are small. Now comes to the buildings, how temple was invented element by element. We are going to discuss in this particular scene. Now the buildings, and remember scene one, they are prototypes and you should say so rather than apologize for it. The starting point is a box. A box. The square Garbhagruha, a flat roof, a pillared porch in front, standing on a low plinth. Temple number 17 at Sanchi is the type of specimen, and it sits incidentally in the same complex as the Great Stupa. So, which tells you the transition from Buddhist to Brahmanical monumentality happened on the same ground. This is the example. Then the elements are added one at a time, and the sequence is worth naming because it is how temple was invented. So next, add a pradakshina pada, circumambulatory path, an enclosed circumambulatory around the sanctum. Then comes to add a shikara, a tower. The curvilinear tower, which is the monument Nagara begins. Then comes to Jagati. Jagati is a raised platform at subsidiary shrines at the corners. The Panchayatana plan. Then comes to the developed examples. Diogar, the Dashavatara temple in Jhansi district around 500 CE. It has Shikara now partly lost. It stands on a platform with corner shrines, an early Panchayatana, and it is wall discipline. In its wall panels are among the finest Gupta sculptures anywhere. Gajendra Moksha, the elephant's rescue, Naranarayana, and the great Sheshai Vishnu, Sheshashai Vishnu, the god asleep on the serpent between world cycles, which is one of the supreme compositions in Indian belief. Baitargaon near Kanpur, and this is one matters for two reasons. First one is survival. It is built in brick. It is built in brick with a shikara, terracotta panels, and carved archwork. It is the principal survivor of what must have been a substantial brick temple tradition that has very largely perished. The second one is, and you have to say this before a student asks you it, like you will meet arches again in chapter number 7, where the arrival of the true arch is dated from the buildings of the Delhi Sultanate. Baitargao does not contradict that. Its openings are corbelled, courses stepped inward until they meet, carrying load down the wall, not arcuate, where wedge shaped osiers, osiers, osiers transfer thrust sideways to the springing. They look similar and they are structurally different things, and the distinctions, the entire spine of chapter 7. Then Tigawa, Nashna Kutara, Bumara, and just after the Chalukyan experiments at Aihole, the Lord Khan temple and the Durga temple, whose apsidal plan is visibly derived from the Buddhist Chaitya Hall. Now, the honest statement about scale, because the paradox depends on it. None of this is large, and none was built to be, not intended to be. The scale is observable, the intention is not. The Gupta temple houses an image and shelters a small number of worshippers. It is not at the walled institutions with tanks and gateways and streets of servants that chapter 5 describes. That the Guptas established is the grammar, sanctum, tower, circumambulation, platform, corner shrine, and every later dynasty simply built it bigger. So you have to say it that way in your answer, and you have converted a weakness into the argument. What is the sin number 5? That is the image and the whole Asia copied. Chapter 3 left you with a problem in the first century. Gandhara carved a Buddha who looked Mediterranean, and Mathura carved and who looked like Eksha, and neither was a copy of the other. The Gupta period resolves it. Two schools do the resolving. Mathura continuing refines its cushion idiom into the standing Buddha with string fold drapery, concentric U-shaped folds falling in regular rhythm across the body, and an elaborately carved hollow behind. Sarnath, working in Chunar sandstone, goes further that takes the folds away entirely. The Sarnath Buddha's robe is completely plain and transparent, clinging without a single fold line, so that nothing interrupts in body's contour. The eyes are lowered, the expression is absolutely still. Behind the head, a richly carved hollow floral scroll, so the ornament is the displaced of the figure and onto the disc behind it. The masterpiece is the seated Buddha of the first sermon at Saranath, hands in Dharmachakra Parivartana Mudra, with the wheel and the deer of the deer park on the pedestal below, and the first five disciples. Now say what the Gupta image achieved, because this is examinable point. It took Mathura's indigenous body and Gandhara's discipline of surface and produced a figure that was neither foreign nor folk, serene, weightless, inward, and above all reproducible. Its proportions could be codified in the next and transmitted, and it was. So the Gupta Buddha type travels into Southeast Asia, into Central Asia, into China, Korea, and Japan. Alongside it, the same sensibility produces the monumental Varaha, the boar incarnation at Udayagiri near Vidisha, and the copper Sultanganj Buddha. So this is regarding about the scene number 5, that is Mathura and Gandhara art of Buddha from Gupta age. Then we are moving to Gupta and Chola and what each left. Here is the 2022 question, that is 250 words, 15 marks. Discuss the main contributions of Gupta period and Chola period into into Indian heritage and culture. So what the Guptas left, the world copied. So the trap is obvious. Two lists side by side. What is the question? Discuss the main contributions of Gupta. Discuss main contributions of Gupta period and Chola period to Indian heritage and culture. So both Gupta and Chola. The trap is obvious. Two lists side by side, no argument. Avoid it by giving the comparison a spine in the first sentence and then hanging both sides of material on it. The spine is the Guptas codified, the Cholas institutionalized. Gupta legacy is portable and reproducible. Chola legacy is fixed and monumental. So now the Gupta contribution across 5 heads compressed. The first one is art, architecture, literature, science, religion, and institutions. These are the 5 things. The first one is art. The Sarnath and Mathura Buddha types exported across Asia. The Diyogar reliefs, the Udayagiri Varaha, the figural gold coinage of scene number 2. Then comes to architecture, the temple grammar, sanctum, shikara, circumambulation, platform, panchayatana. Then comes to literature, Kalidasa in drama and in kavyas, Vishakadatta's Mudra Rakshasa, Shudraka's Mruchakatika and Amarakoshas, the Pancharatna, the Panchatantra, the compilation of the Puranas, Then comes to science, Aryabhatta. Aryabhatta, whose Aryabhatiya 499 CE handles place value, a close approximation of pi, and the Earth's rotation, Varahamihira, and the iron pillar at Mehrauli, conventionally attributed to that period, whose corrosion resistance is a metallurgical achievement still cited. Then comes to religion and institution, the consolidation of Puranic worship and the displacement of sacrifice by image worship in a temple. A Nalanda, founded in this period, later UNESCO inscribed in 2016. Then comes to Chola contribution, and note carefully what this section is. Architecture, Bruhadeshwara, Gangaikonda Cholapuram, Airavateshwara, together great living Chola temples. Comes to sculpture, the branch tradition, the Nataraja, the processional icon. Then comes to institution, the temple as landlord, bank, employer and achieve. Then comes to administration and record, the densest epigraphy in Indian history, including the Uttara Merur inscriptions and elected village committees. Comes to reach, maritime contact across Southeast Asia. So now the comparative judgment, which is what converts an answer from a list into an argument. What the Guptas left, the world copied. What the Cholas left, the world visits. Gupta contributions are transmissible: an image type, a text, a numeral system, an architectural grammar. They spread because they could be reproduced anywhere by anyone who learned the convention. That is why a Gupta Buddha shape turns up in Japan. That is why a Gupta Buddha shape turns up in Japan. Then comes to Chola contributions are emplaced. A temple stands where it stands, an inscription is on a wall. A branch belongs to a specific festival street. Their achievement was to build institutions so durable that they are still functioning. The great living Chola temples remain in worship 1,000 years on, and Swami Malay still casts and close on what they share because the examiner asks about both. Both periods are remembered for art, and both were fact organizing something larger. The Guptas a body of knowledge, the Cholas a body of institutions. The art is the part that survived visibly. It was never the whole what was built. So every other chapter in this part closes by pointing at something you can go and see. This one cannot, and that is the point. You used the Gupta legacy this morning and did not notice the decimal place value notation. The Aryabhatta's generation fixed is the notation on your phone, in your bank statement, in every figure, in every other chapter of this marathon. It passed to Baghdad, and from Baghdad to Europe, and the Europeans called the digits Arabic because that is where they met them. They are working with a Gupta convention, and so are you. So the Buddha is almost every temple in East Asia is a Sarnath descent, not a copy of Gupta statue, a copy of Gupta specification, carried in text, reproduced by people who never saw the original and never needed to. Then Nalanda was inscribed by UNESCO in 2016, and a university carrying its name has been built beside the ruins. A deliberate attempt to restart an institution after 800 years, which is a different heritage question from any other of this part. And the iron pillar at Mehrauli is still standing in the open air and still barely rusting. So here is the closing argument is the Chola achievement survives because it is protected. The Gupta achievement survives because it was copied so completely that the original stopped mattering. So what the Guptas made, the world copied. What the Cholas made, the world visits. One built templates, and the other built institutions. And the temples won because you were using one before you sat down to watch this. So here, what you have to say and what do not have to say. The Chandella built 5 centuries after the Cholas. Instead of the Tanjavuru around 1010, Khajuraho around 1030, one generation apart. Paithargaon proves Indians had the arch before the Sultanate. Paithargaon's opening are cobbled, not accurate, not arcuate. Chapter 7's dating turns on that distinction. Ajanta's paintings are Gupta. The second phase is Vakataka under Harisena contemporaneous, not Gupta patronage. The king and queen coin type is the Chandragupta 2, Chandragupta 1 with Kumara Devi. And then Mehroli pillars, courage and resistance is unexplained. No, is well understood. A phosphorus rich iron, a phosphorus rich iron forming its own passive layer and achieved with no theory of corrosion behind it. So you have to say these things or write these things rather than this. So what are the most probable questions for 2026? The Gupta period laid the foundation of Indian temple architecture without itself producing a monumental temple. Examine. This is 150 words 10 marker question. Then coins are among the most reliable sources for the political and cultural history of early India. 250 words 15 marker question. Assess the contribution of the Gupta period to India's scientific and literary heritage. 150 words 10 marker question. Then we are moving to the next chapter, that is chapter number 5th. The temple takes shape. Nagara, Dravida and Vesara. So the temple became a bank, landlord, and employer before it became monument. And the largest towers came from dynastic fighting for legitimacy, not from dynasties enjoying it. The past questions are here. Pallavas of Kanchi, art and literature estimate. Then the Cholas remembered for art and architecture comment. Chola architecture as a high water mark. 2013 question. Then Chandala sculpture resilient vigor and breadth of life elucidate. Then temple sculpture as a record of social life. So this is all regarding the past questions as far as this concerned. Then we are moving to the first scene, that is three grammars. What are the three grammars? Nagara, Dravida, Vesara. So before any question in this chapter, you need three words and you need to use them correctly because most candidates use one of them wrongly. Nagara, first one. The northern style. The tower over the sanctum is curvilinear. It rises and it bends inwards in its rises. It rises, it bends inward as it rises. It is crowned by the Amalaka, the ribbed disc, and above that the Kalasha, the part final. The temple usually stands on a raised platform, the Jagati. There is normally no boundary wall and no gateway tower. The plan is often Panchayatana, a principal shrine with four subsidiary shrines at the corners of the platform. This is regarding Nagara. Then comes to Dravida, the southern style. This is the tower over the sanctum is not curvilinear. It is a pyramid of diminishing stories. Each story articulated as miniature building. The temple sits inside a walled enclosure. The prakara entered through a gateway tower, the Gopuram. There is a temple tank. There are pillared halls. Then comes to Vesara, the Deccan. The conventional label for several Deccan traditions that combine and transform features associated with the northern and southern vocabularies, a curvilinear profile over storied articulation. The early Chalukyas at Badami and Pattadakkal are central to its development. The Hoysala are its most elaborate later expression, and it is there that the stellate plan appears. Now, the distinction that separates a good answer from an average one. In the north, Shikara means the whole tower. In the south, the whole tower is the Vimana, and Shikara means only the small crowning element at the very top, the octagonal cupola. So, a candidate who writes the Shikara of a Brihadishwara is 216 feet high has used the word wrongly. The Vimana is 216 feet, not Shikara. The Shikara is the stone at the top of it. Say it correctly once your answer, and the examiner knows you have read something. Two more things about Dravida that reverse over time. Early on, the Vimana over the sanctum is the tallest in the complex. By the Vijayanagara and Nayaka period, the Gopurams and the outer walls have grown so large that the sanctum tower is dwarfed by its own gateways. The center of visual gravity moves from the center to the perimeter. So that is not decoration, it is a statement about who the temple is now addressing, the crowd outside rather than the deity inside. And Nagara has substyles you should name rather than treat as one thing. Latina, a single curvilinear tower. Famsana, a broader, lower, straight sided roof used for the halls. Wallaby, a rectangular barrel roof. A mature Khajuraho temple uses Latina over the sanctum and Famsana over the mandapas in front of it, which is why the silhouette rises in the stages like a mountain range. So this is all regarding three grammars, that is Nagara, Dravida and Vesara, and the word most candidates use wrongly, that is Vimana Shikara. So you have to learn the differences between those two when you are while you are writing your answer. So then we are moving to the Pallavas of Kanchi. Here is the 2024 question, 150 words, 10 marks. Estimate the contribution of Pallavas of Kanchi for the development of art and literature of South India. Estimate the contribution of Pallavas of Kanchi for the development of art and literature of South India. Two words here decide this answer, that is estimate. So you must weigh, not list, and literature, and almost every candidate writes only about stone. Take the art first and give it as a sequence, because the Pallava contribution is not a set of things, it is a transition. They took South Indian temple building from rock to structure, and they did it in four identifiable stages. The first one is the Mahendra stage. Mahendra Varman the first, early 7th century, rock cut cave temples. Mandapas excavated into the living rock. The Mandagapattu inscription is the anchor here. It records that the temple was made without brick, without timber, without metal, and without mortar. The king who commissioned it took to the title Vichitra Chitta, the curious minded. That inscription is your evidence that the shift to stone was conscious and was announced as an innovation. Then comes to the Mamalla stage. Narasimha Varma the first, called Mamalla, mid 7th century at Mahabalipuram. The monolithic rathas, Dharmaraja, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula Sahadeva, and Draupadi, each carved from a single outcrop and each experimenting with a different roof form. They are not temples in use, they are a catalogs of possibilities in stone. And the great open air relief, the descent of the Ganga, which is among the largest bas reliefs anywhere. The third one is Rajasimha stage. Narasimha Varma II Early 8th century, now the temple is built up, not cut down. Structural masonry. The Shore temple at Mahabalipuram and the Kailasanada at Kanchipuram. The fourth one is Nandivarma stage. Nandivarman the second. Latter 8th century, the Vaikunta Perumal temple at Kanchi, whose enclosure walls carry a sculpted historical narratives of the dynasty itself. Now the half that wins the question. The examiner wrote art and literature. So give literature 4 sentences and you separate yourself from the field. Mahadeva Varman, the first was himself an author. The Sanskrit farce, the Sanskrit fairs, Matta Vilasa Prahasana, a satire on the religious orders of his own capital written by a reigning king about his own city. Then Kanchi under the Pallavas was a center of Sanskrit learning with a Gatika, an institution of higher study. Dandin, author of Kavyadarsha, and Dashakumara Charita is associated with Pallava court, and the decisive literary fact is in Tamil, not Sanskrit. The Pallava period is the period of the Nayanars and Alvars, the Shaiva and Vaishnava saint poets whose Tamil hymns become the Tevaram and the Divya Prabandham. Appar Sambandar and Sundarar belong here. Appar is remembered as having drawn Mahendra Varma the first from Jainism to Shaivism. So state the estimate because the verb demands it. So the Pallava achievement in art is transitional and therefore foundational. Everything the Cholas do structurally begins here. The achievement in literature is not institutional but originating. So Tamil Shaiva and Vaishnava Bhakti crystallizes into a mass devotional literary traditions under the Pallavas and never stops. The honest qualification here is because estimate invites one. The Pallava monuments are experimental rather than monumental. Nothing at Mahabalipuram approaches Tanjavuru in scale. What the Pallavas contributed was a vocabulary. What the Cholas contributed was a sentence built from it. Then moves to the Cholas. Two questions live here and they ask the same thing at different lengths. So build one body of materials and cut it to fit. The 2013 100 words 5 marks Chola architecture as a high watermark. 2024 250 words 15 marks. The assertion that Chola achievements in art and architecture is why the name is still remembered with pride. So the 2024 wording is an assertion validation question. It hands you a claim, agree and then qualify because the examiner has framed the entire Chola legacy through a single lens and a good answer notices the framing. So start with the three monuments and give them a sequence with dates attached. The first one is Bruhadishwara at Tanjavuru, the Rajarajeshwara built by Rajaraja first and consecrated around 1010. So the temple has been standing and in worship for over 1,000 years ago, over 1,000 years. The Vimana rises roughly 216 feet in 13 stories. It is built of granite in a delta with no granite in it, which means every stone was moved. About it sits a massive crowning cupola. Gangaikonda Cholapuram, built by Rajendra I after his northern expedition to the Ganga around 1025. Airavateshwara at Darasuram, Rajaraja II, 12th century, smaller, later, and finer with a mandapa conceived as a chariot on wheels. The three together are inscribed by UNESCO as the great living Chola temples. Tanjavuru first, the other two added later an extension. The word to notice in the title is living. So these are not ruins under a conservation regime. They are functioning temples which changes every conservation question that can be asked about them. So Rajendra first is the first conquered more than his father did. He took Chola arms to the Ganga. He sent a fleet against Srivijaya and he took the title Gangaikonda, he who brought the Ganges, and he built his tower shorter than his father's. Tanjavuru rises to roughly 216 feet. Gangaikonda Cholapuram rises to roughly 182 feet. And where Tanjavuru's profile is straighted, edged, and severe. Rajendra's curves inward softer in Silhout. Greater Empire built the smaller tower. Now handle the explanation carefully because this is where a good answer separates itself from a confident one. The height difference is documented. The reason for it is not. No inscription tells us why Rajendra built a lower. The usual reading and it persuasive in is a difference. The usual reading. The usual reading and his persuasive is difference. A son declining to overtop his father. In the one medium, a Chola emperor had a making permanent statement. Says that way as reading rather than a finding, and you have shown the examiner that you know the difference between the stone records and what we infer from it, and whichever explanation you prefer, the observation that survives is the one worth writing. These towers were arguments between people, not only offering to the gods. Now the second register, because the 2024 question says art, not only architecture. Chola branch, cast by the last wax method. What matters for this question is why branch. And the answer is functional rather than aesthetic. These are processional icons. Stone stays the sanctum. A branch goes out to out into the street. Chola temple religion required that deity to be carried out through the town at festivals to be seen by everyone, and a deity who must travel must be cast in metal. So Chola branch is the theological requirement solved in an ally. The Nataraja is sits supreme achievement, and the tradition did not stop. Swami Malai near Kumbakonam still sustains hereditary Stapati lineages casting by the same method under the same Shilpa text. So now qualify because the question is an assertion. The Cholas are remembered for art and architecture, but they were also remembered in their own records. For something else, Chola inscriptions and copper plate charters are among the richest administrative archives in Indian history. So, genealogy, genealogy, land grants, temple endowments, revenue arrangements, the Uttaramerur inscription record, village assemblies electing the committees by a lot. Chola Maritime, Chola Maritime reach extended to Southeast Asia. So the honest answer is yes. The temples are why the name survives in popular memory, but the inscriptions are why the period survives is historical memory. In historical memory, the monuments are the reason people remember. The epigraphy is the reason historians can. So the 2013 version is the same content at 100 words. Watermarks means peak. So name what peaked. So name what peaked. Scale, granite construction at unprecedented mass, the fully realized storied Vimana and the integration of temple with branch, inscription and institution. One line in what came after. The Vijayanagara and Nayaka period did not build taller sanctum towers, it is built taller gateways. The high water mark of the Vimana is Chola and it was never exceeded. So this is all regarding about monuments and record. Then we are moving to Chandellas and Nagara in the north. So here is the 2025 question, 150 words 10 mark question. The sculptors filled the Chandella art form with resilient vigor and breadth of life. Elucidate. Elucidate make it clear. Elucidate minutes. Elucidate means what? Make it clear. So take the examiner's two phrases and show what each one refers on the actual stone. Candidates who write a general essay on Khajuraho will score half. The first, the architecture briefly because it is the frame. The Chandelas of Bundelkhand, roughly the 10th of the 13th century. Roughly the 10th to 13th century. Khajuraho of an original group traditionally numbered around 85, roughly 25 survive, and the site is UNESCO inscribed. Those are three groups: the western, which holds the major Shaiva and Vaishnava temples, the eastern, largely Jain, and southern Kandariya Mahadeva, built under Vidyadhara around 10,030, is the largest and most fully realized. Its features named correctly, it stands on a high Jagati platform with no boundary wall and no gateway. The temple is meant to be seen whole from outside in the round. The plan is Saptarada. The sanctum walls project in seven vertical offsets, so the tower is not smooth cone but a handle of vertical ridges. Around the principal Shikara cluster, the Urishingas, subsidiary miniature towers, so that the silhouette reads as a mountain massif rather than a single peak. The interior runs on a single axis, Ardha Mandapa, Mandapa, Maha Mandapa, Antarala, Garbhagruha with a Pradakshana Pada around the sanctum. Now the question's first phrase, resilient vigor. That is a statement about the human body as the sculptors carved it. Chandella figures are not static and frontal. They twist. The bodies are held in tribhanga and three bend posture. Weight on one leg, hip thrown out, torso countered, head turned, limbs across the body's axis. A figure reaches behind her own shoulder or bends to touch her ankle or turns away from the viewer so that you see back onto the profile at once. Vigor is the muscle modeling and the sense of arrested movement. Resilient is the better word, and it is doing specific work. These bodies look elastic as if the pose could spring back. The stone has been carved to behave like flesh under tension. So now the second phrase is breadth of life. The walls of a Chandela temple carry more than deities. They carry in registers and inventory what people actually did. Dancers and musicians with named instruments, Surasundaris and Apsaras in the act of ordinary life, applying coal, wringing water from wet hair, writing a letter, removing a throne from the foot, torn from the foot, playing with a child, looking into a mirror, teachers with peoples, ascetics, warriors, elephants, marching armies, potters, and other artisans at work, Mithuna couples, Shardulas, and Vyalas, the rearing composite lion at the corners, and yes, a proportion of the sculpture is erotic. Say it plainly and handle it academically, because that is what a mark scoring answer does. It is a minority of the total. It is and the outer walls, the jangan, the junctions, and it is never in the sanctum. The main scholarly readings are Kama as one of the four Purusharathas legitimately represented on the exterior, while moksha is approached to the interior, a tantric register of ritual meaning, and an apotropiac, apotropiac or auspicious function at structural junctions. Give one sentence, give the placement fact, move on. So the examiner asked about breadth of life. The erotic register is one band of it, not the subject. Then close the elucidation with the argument. The phrase implies the reason Chandela sculpture reads as full of life is that the sculptors treated the temple wall as a surface of whole of existence, sacred and secular, with the divine and the center and human activity radiating outward. That is not decoration around a religious core, that is a cosmology. laid out in bands. So one line of context so that answer is not marooned at Khajuraho. The same Nagara impulse produces the same centuries in the same centuries. The Kalinga temples of Odisha, Lingaraja at Bhubaneswar, Konark conceived as the sun god's chariot with its carved wheels and horses, and the Solanki work of Gujarat, the Mothera Sun Temple with its step tank, and the Rani Ki Vav stepwell in Patan, which is UNESCO inscribed. Khajuraho is the most complete surviving example of a shared northern grammar, not a solitary one. Then moving to the scene number 5, that is sculpture as a social record. This is the 2022 question with 150 words 10 marker. How will you explain the medieval Indian temple sculptures represent the social life of those days? This is the question. You have just seen the inventory. The scene is not inventory again, it is the method. Scene 4 described what is on a Chandella wall. The scene answers a different question: how does an image become historical evidence at all? What is the verb here? Explain. And the trap is to answer by listing sculptures. Give 4 channels and 1 example in each. 4, not 8. The first one is costume. How an image becomes evidence. 4 channels. The first one is costume. Ornament and hairstyle. Sculpted figures wear dateable dress, textile drape, jewelry types, the way hair is dressed, the presence or absence of stitched garments. This is how the material culture of a period that left no cloth is recovered from a period that left stone. The second one is occupation and technology. Temple walls show people working, musicians with identifiable instruments, dancers in recognizable postures, potters, metal workers, hunters, cultivators, soldiers with specific weapons, elephants in harness. The detailed rendering of vehicles, instruments, weapons, harness, and tools is evidence for contemporary technology and material culture. The Konark wheels among them. The third one is ritual and belief. Ritual belief, the calendar, processions, offerings, the deity being carried out, which is exactly why the Chola branch exists. Sculpture records not only what was believed but what was performed and how often. The fourth one is hierarchy. What is the hierarchy? And this is one to state carefully. The temple wall records status. Who is shown large and who small? Who is shown clothed and who are not? Who is shown at the center and who at the margin? Patrons appear. Donors are named in accompanying inscriptions. And the temple's own personnel, musicians, garland makers, accountants, and the dance women recorded in inscriptions as attached to the temple appear as a working establishment. Now the caution: the examiner will reward and almost nobody gives it. Temple sculpture is commissioned art. It represents social life as a pattern and the priesthood wished it represented. It over-represents the courtly, the prosperous, and the ritually central. It under-represents the poor, the laboring and excluded, who are present mostly the as background are not at all. The wall is evidence. What is evidence? It is evidence. It is evidence with an interest. So the correct formulation is not that temple sculpture is a picture of society. It is that temple sculpture is a selective and interested record. It is exactly what a historical expects of any source and exactly what a historian must correct for. And that qualification, and you have written an answer about historical method, not an answer about carvings. So what the temple actually was, the scene owns no past question. Learn it anyway because it is the argument that makes every other scene in this chapter cohere, and because it has never been asked. We have spent 5 scenes on towers and sculptures. Now say what the building was actually for. institutionally? Because the answer is not only worship. So frame it this way before you list anything. A major endowed temple could function as far more than a place of worship. The temple was a landlord, kings and merchants endowed it with land devadana. The temple then held that land, drew revenue from it, and had to manage tenants and cultivation. A major temple was one of the largest landholders in its region. The temple was a bank. It received deposits of gold and coin, and it lent it recorded rates of interest. The endowment was not a gift consumed. It was a capital fund whose income paid for perpetual ritual. Chola inscriptions record these arrangements with the precision of a ledger. How much gold at what rate to whom for which lamp in perpetuity. The temple was an employer. The Tanjavuru inscription record an establishment of hundreds of people attached to the temple. Dance women relocated from other temples and settled in streets around it. Musicians, drummers, accountants, garland makers, watchmen, cooks, lamplighters, carpenters, goldsmiths. A functioning temple was a payroll. The temple was an archive or archive. The walls were the record surface, land grants, endowments, assembly decisions, genealogies, disputes carved on the plinth and the enclosure because stone outlasts palm leaf. This is why Chola South India is exceptionally richly documented for the pre-modern period, and it is consequence of temple building, not a separate fact about it. And the temple was a school and granary and a refuge, recitation halls, feeding arrangements, storage. So comes to the paradox together. If you hold those five functions in mind, like landlord, bank, employer, and archive, etc., if you hold those five functions in mind, the tower stops being purely devotional. The temple was an economic institution, a legal record office, and a center of employment. Building the largest one in the region was therefore an act with material consequences. It moved land, labor, revenue, and people. And that explains a pattern this chapter keeps running into. The great towers cluster around dynasties that were consolidating, not dynasties that were secure. Rajaraja built Tanjavuru as the Chola state was being rebuilt into an empire. Vidyadhara built the Kandariya Mahadeva in the decades when the Chandelas were contesting northern India. The Pallavas built Mahabalipura while pressed by the Chalukyas. A tower is expensive, permanent, and visible from a distance, and there is no cheaper way to make claim about legitimacy that outlives the person making it. Two cautions and give both. The first one is the on the pattern itself. Three cases makes a suggestive pattern, not a demonstrated law. There are counter examples in both directions, and the correlations is easier to assert than to prove. Offer it as a reading of why monumental building clusters where it does not as a rule. The second one is the motive. State this carefully, not cynically. The historian need not deny the sincerity of devotion in order to ask what other political, economic, and institutional functions monumental temple building performed. The question is not whether the patterns believed or not. It is what else the building did, and what else it did was hold land, employ people, record law, and assert a dynasty. Then what survives and what is still running? Two closing facts and they point in opposite directions. The first is loss. At Khajuraho, the tradition counts around 85 temples, roughly 25 stand. That is under a third. The survival rate of one of the best perceived and the best protected temple sites in the country. Everything in this chapter is a fraction of what was built. When you write about Nagara or Dravida, you are generalizing from the survivors, and the survivors are not a random sample. What survived tended to slow stone rather than brick, endowed rather than abandoned, and continuously in worship rather than dependent on a dynasty that fell. The second is continuity, and it is the more remarkable of the two. Brihadishwara was consecrated. Brihadishwara was consecrated around 1010, that is 1010. It is still worship. UNESCO's title for the group is Great Living Chola Temples, and the operative word is living. These are not archaeological sites with visitors. They are functioning institutions with congregations, and that changes conservation entirely. You cannot treat a working temple the way you treat a ruin, because the community using it has a claim that conservation manual does not override. At Swamimalai, Stapati families are still casting branches for temples that will process them through the same streets. And in the 20th century, Somnath was rebuilt in the Chalukyas idiom by the architect Prabhashankar Somapura using traditional methods, and inaugurated in 1951, a deliberate choice to reconstruct rather than to conserve a ruin, which is the sharpest test case Indian heritage policy has, where restoration ends and reinvention begins. So that is the chapter's real subject. Indian temple architecture is not a closed historical period. It is a practice that is still running, which is why question about it are as often about conservation, ownership, and use as about style. So we call the monuments because they survived. They were built as institutions, and the ones that are still institutions are the ones that survived. Before you write what you have to say this way or not that way, do not say the Shikara of Bruhadishwara is 216 feet. What you have to say, the Vimana. The Vimana is the Shikara is only the crowning cupola above it, as far as Dravida is concerned. The shadow of the Vimana never falls on the ground. Nothing, a popular claim, not architectural fact. So the capstone is a single 80-ton block. No, a massive crowning cupola, the single block claim is contested. The same class of claim, the shadow story. So roughly a quarter of the Khajuraho temples survive, a roughly 3 in 10, about 25, around 85, under a third, not quarter. Vesara temples have stellate plants, do not say. Stellate belongs to the mature Hoysala phase, not fully Vesara. Badami, Badami Pattadakal or early Chalukyan are not stellate. So what are the most probable questions for 2026? The early medieval temple was an economic and administrative institution as much as a religious one. Examine with reference to the South Indian evidence. 250 words, 15 marker question. Then distinguish the Nagara and Dravida styles of temple architecture and account for their divergence. 150 words, 10 markers. The Hoysala temples represent the culmination of the Vesara tradition. Elucidate. This is 150 words, 10 marker question. With this, we are completed total 5 chapters of volume 1 of art and architecture. Then we are moving to the next volume, that is chapter number 6 to chapter number 10 in the next class. Until then, please read carefully. Thank you.